thank everyone for listening or attending. I wanted to look at sobriety support, and because of millennial technology and social support and the way that people look for it, seek it, I was interested to see if face-to-face versus online had any difference in terms of the sobriety support, mostly focusing on Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the things that obviously everyone's interested in is in technology and what it can do that's positive, and then some of the issues that we struggle with that are more controversial. So I just wanted to see if there was a migration from face-to-face AA to online, and if so, what was the experience of the user? My first slide here, I just thought was funny, and it was just the opening. It says AA has been moved upstairs because of wine club, which I found just a little funny. Okay, so this is a very famous kind of quote that people who are in recovery try to remember. First, the man takes a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes the man, and that was from 1886. So why did I do this study, and why now? 241.8 million Americans use the internet, and of course it's growing every day, and globally it's expanding profoundly. 176.5 million American adult internet users use social networking sites. 23.5 million American adults consider themselves in recovery from a drug or alcohol problem. So there's 23.5 million American adults. Because this is an anonymous program and some people don't disclose, we're imagining that that number is higher. So if you do the math, it was only a matter of time before everything started to move and migrate online. So this is my study. So here's some stats, because we all love stats, especially as researchers. So in 2012, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration classified 24.6 million persons in the U.S. with substance dependence or abuse. That's a lot of people. And that's 12 years or older. In 2010, the CDC reported that 23% of adults aged greater than 18 disclosed having had 5 or more drinks in one day. That's, I don't know how other people drink, but 5 drinks in a day, that's, you want to look at that. And then their study concluded that there were half of the adult U.S. population had drank alcohol in the past 30 days. 5% of those drank heavily, and 15% could be classified as problem or binge drinkers. A binge drinker is someone who maybe doesn't drink every day, but when they do drink, they have the same problems as people who drink every day. So there's, in the world of addiction, there's really no difference between a daily drinker and a binge drinker, because once they start, they don't know when it's going to stop. The National Institute on Alcohol and Alcoholism claims that nearly 18% of Americans currently abuse alcohol or alcohol dependence. So here's some more stats. 86% of American youth by the age of 21 have used alcohol. 1.4 million underage youth report being heavy drinkers, and 5.4 million binge drink. But that's younger people who are not even of legal age to drink. Surveys show more than 22.9% of adults report binge drinking in the past month. That's almost a quarter of adults. The most common age is 21 to 25, 26 to 29. About 3 in 10 U.S. adults drink at levels that elevate their risk. So that's why I'm looking at this, because it looks like it's a pretty significant portion of our population. So there's some impact on health, obviously. So long-term alcohol use can affect the central nervous system, cardiovascular, breathing, sleep, liver, certainly, pancreatitis, sexual reproductive disorders, bone and joint ailments. These are all parts of the biological system that are affected or affected by alcohol abuse. And then obviously there's the psychological and sociological effects. On the right are more of the sociological effects. So it's 17.6 million U.S. adults and millions more teens are currently estimated to be alcoholic. That's 1 in 13 people. And again, those of us in the field know that this number is light because a lot of people aren't talking about it and certainly not disclosing it. The National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse of Columbia estimates that substance abuse and addiction cost almost $500 billion, $467.7 billion in 2005, and now it's costing us $600 billion annually. So it's also affecting the rest of the population as well. CDC also reported that from 2006 2010, there were 88,000 deaths annually attributed to excessive alcohol use. Obviously, it's not a surprise that a significant portion of these are from drinking and driving. So the leading causes of death in the U.S. are related to alcohol, drugs, and other addictions. The thing about alcohol and alcohol abuse is that it crosses racial, cultural, educational, and socio-economical status. No one is immune from becoming an alcoholic or having a problem with alcohol or drugs. Males tend to be more prone to an alcohol dependence than females, but again, this could be charged to sampling cultural and misogynistic-based misrepresentation rather than authentic numbers. It is increasing in the number of victims each year. 10% of individuals with substance abuse commit complete suicide. That means they're successful, and the only way out is to get some help. So without some form of friends and family, legal or medical intervention, it's rare that substance dependence can be defeated. In other words, you're not just going to wake up one day probably and stop. You need some help, and there needs to be some sort of intervention. So we spend $197 million every day on alcohol. 3/4 of all current high school students, seniors report having been drunk at least once, and if it's once, it's probably more than that. A person's killed in an alcohol-related car accident every 30 minutes in this country. Addiction is classified as a disease by the American Medical Association because it falls under the only 3 criteria that are required for something to be considered a disease. So according to the AMA, a disease has to be chronic, progressive, and pathologically causing compulsive substance seeking and use despite harmful consequences. So what this means is addiction is considered a disease because it's chronic, meaning it's going to keep going without someone intervening. It's progressive, meaning it gets worse, and without treatment or some sort of intervention, the prognosis is dire. The biocharacters of alcohol and drug dependence include increased tolerance. If you try to stop, you very possibly will manifest some sort of withdrawal symptoms for alcohol. It can be a lot of different things. The worst is a seizure, and that's very common with people that have profound alcohol abuse. They try to stop without any sort of help or medical intervention, and they could throw a seizure. You're going to have compromised physicality or impairment, and you're going to have an increase in either the amount or duration, meaning the problem's just going to get worse. Psychological systems include you just want to stop or control. You keep saying, this is the last time, I'm going to be better next time, and you are unsuccessful at that. And you have an increased emotional imbalance or dysregulation. Indicators are a significant devotion of time dedicated toward obtaining, using, or recovering. So what it means is that the sociological indicators mean that your life is just going to take a spiral down. You're going to have consequences. There's going to be disappointment. You're going to lose things. Your life is going to start to crumble. So what does it look like? What does addiction look like? Addiction looks like everybody. It looks like your neighbor. It looks like your friend. It might look like someone in your family. In any given place you are, if you look around, chances are somebody that you're looking at, whether it be at a mall, at a restaurant, at a family gathering, the odds are that somebody there has a problem. Although the media may make it seem that it's a privilege primarily reserved for the rich and famous, it's actually, as I said earlier, non-discriminatory. It could affect anybody and everybody. It could be your brother, your boss, your next-door neighbors. Adventures in Drunky Town usually don't make the media, so we don't hear about them. So even though we hear about the more tragic stories of more high profile, those happen every day to people. We just don't hear about them because they're not famous. This is a study. When I took a class at Dr. Hug a few years ago, I was looking at how the media portrays drinking. I took the top 10 songs of 2010 for an assignment that she gave us, and I did Alexa Answers content analysis and did this little cloud of what the themes were for the songs that people are listening to on the radio. What are the most common themes? And of the top 10 songs of 2010, according to Billboard, these were the themes we saw. And it's really looking like it's glorifying drinking and partying. And this was another song that was very popular that talks about the darker side of addiction. This was a movie that came out that was talking about the anonymous people, and it was trying to put some outreach and some education for just anyone who's not in the program about what alcoholism is and where there can be some help. I also am doing a study where I'm looking at television, and this is a list of the current and recent television shows which feature addicted characters or storyline, and this is just a partial list. So this is from the last couple of years. Every show on this list is dealing with addiction or has a character which is addicted, which in a lot of ways is really great because this was anonymous for so long and a dark secret that no one talked about, and now that television is displaying it, it's good. The problem is that the way it's being displayed has some controversy because some of it doesn't seem really authentic, and people are watching this and believing that some of the things they see are true.
Addiction is the new black. We're seeing it everywhere, and that's a good thing. Again, I like that it's a conversation, which it never was. This is pretty new. For a long time, it was just kept in the dark. People have always struggled with addiction, just no one really talked about it. So the fact that the media is helping promote a conversation or a dialogue about it is good news. As I said earlier, most professionals believe that without some form of intervention, the prognosis for any kind of substance abuse is not very strong. But there's hope. This was an ad. He's going to cure you. No, not that. So there's support groups, individuals sharing a common problem, concern, or experience. They're usually peer-led and membership-directed. For a lot of people who don't have health insurance, and this is something we discovered in another study that I did with another group, for people who don't have the financial means or health insurance, where are they going to try to get support? So support groups is an option. So what is there out there for the struggling alcoholic or addict seeking help? Historically, addiction recovery sources were limited, but now there's a couple of different ways you can go. You can go to a treatment center, and experts are estimating that more than 2 million Americans age 12 and older enlisted the aid of a chemical dependency center in 2010. And there's support groups, and those are face-to-face, and the most well-known is Alcoholics Anonymous. And then there's online options as well for support groups, and this is the study. So 10% of all American adults age 18 and older consider themselves to be in recovery. That's 23.5 million adults, as I said before. That's great. Whoops, you can't see. At the top, it says Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is a little background. So it's 80 years old this year. Current membership is estimated at 2 million, and that, again, could be higher because it's an anonymous program, so you don't have to say that you're in it, and that's the whole point. Members gather in over 100,000 face-to-face groups around the globe. Half of these are in the U.S. There's only one requirement, and that's a desire to stop drinking. You don't have to be sober. You just have to have a desire to stop, and you're welcome. It's based on one alcoholic helping another, and the fellowship relies on the assumption of anonymity in order to protect those wishing to participate. In other words, the anonymous part of it is so you can go there and not have your boss, not have your friends, not have the PTA find out that you're there, and there's just a code of anonymity that extends throughout the program. That it's an honor system, but it's pretty well held. So studies have evidence that the positive correlation identified between AA self-help group involvement and reduced drinking can be changed by social networks. When it says social networks, it doesn't just mean the social networks like we know online, of course those, but it also means in changing your playground and changing your playmates. So in other words, if you've spent a lot of time hanging out with people who drink and you want to get sober or you want to stop using drugs, you probably should change those people and find some people who don't do that, because that can be a little tricky and a little slippery. So even though it's anonymous, there's still people who are afraid. They think that someone's going to find out. They're embarrassed. There's some geographic areas where there aren't meetings. There just aren't. Los Angeles, where I live, happens to be a mecca. You really can't throw a bottle and not find an AA meeting here. But there's other parts of the country and certainly the world where it's not like that. Some people are in denial or not sure they are an alcoholic and don't need the program. There's a lot of misconceptions regarding AA as some cult or religious-based organization, which it's neither. People relapse. And then some people have some other disorders that impede their ability to attend face-to-face meetings. This is some of the problems with face-to-face. So the solution is social media. You can share, you can talk, and it's not just in ones that are based in sobriety. I've seen throughout a lot of social media sites people asking questions, trying to find others who maybe have a problem with substance abuse or alcohol. It all started in 1986. There were electronic billboards, the old school, and it sounds funny to say old school when it wasn't that long ago relatively, but that was where they were first linked. And alcoholics and addicts had certain places they could go on these billboards where they could join meetings. So they're online meetings. They're in real time around the world. Today, there's thousands of cyberspace sobriety support sites. Now, the proliferation is incredible. There's lots and lots of places you can go, depending on what you're about and what you think. And you don't have to just choose and go to the local AA clubhouse that's in your hometown. You can find them everywhere online, and they're 24/7, and it's really anonymity because it's 100% possible to be anonymous online. There's websites, there's email, there's chat, there's web-based platforms that target specifically support-seeking alcoholic who's unwilling or unable to participate in traditional face-to-face. For social media, if you just search the term alcoholic on Facebook, you'll find hundreds of group pages where members can post and they can discuss, and this can be synchronous or asynchronous. Similar opportunities exist on LinkedIn and other platforms. And then there's also recovery-based websites. So now there's a lot of different different places that someone can go online to look for some support if you have a problem. And there's also the online sobriety support groups, online Alcoholics Anonymous, and sobriety support group meetings. Dr. David Giles, who works with media psychology, says that online communication is extremely important for people who are unable to meet other people in conventional settings for a variety of reasons. He was not talking about addiction, but obviously what he's saying in his hypothesis is applicable to substance abuse and alcohol support. Online Alcoholics Anonymous are most commonly held in IRC chat rooms. Members can communicate with each other in real time. It's not delayed. You can sit, it's just like having a meeting face-to-face, except that you're sitting wherever you are. There's no visual contact usually between participants. Some of them have them, but most don't, or you can elect not to have your visual blocked. Skype meetings, they're trying them. They're still relatively new. They do exist. And they also, a lot of times they'll ask, you can block your image if you'd like. I put this in because one of the problems geographically is rurally, like I said earlier, there's places in the country where people don't have access to AA meetings and they still need them and would like to attend them. This is about social influences. A social influence can play a role, sometimes significantly, in shaping your health behaviors. We're looking at social media, and we're looking at how social media affects people's everyday behaviors, and I do some other work with technology addiction where I look at the affect and effect that social media can have. But for our purposes here, it's talking about their attitudes and issues related to health. 85% of U.S. adults, and I find that conservative, and certainly that number, I'm sure and confident, is growing daily, maybe hourly, have online access. 72 to 80% regularly access social media. This has become important for something we're looking at when I tell you how I designed the methodology for my study. This is Dr. Sidney Cobb in 1976, and he was talking to the American Psychosomatic Society, and he talked about social support. And he said how social support helps the person feel they're cared for and loved, esteemed and valued, and most importantly to me, I think, belongs to a network of communication and mutual obligation. So not only are you connected, but you also feel an obligation. Even though it wasn't the thesis of his talk, he said that social support can accelerate recovery from alcoholism, and he publicly espoused AA. The most recent self-help group catalyst started in the 1980s, and it was the media dramatization and documentation of self-help groups. We never really saw them before. I'm going to move forward because I don't want to run out of time. But we're seeing a lot of self-help groups now that were never shown as part of media or never were shown as part of storylines, and we're seeing them now. So if 1 in 4 people are estimated to be using social media networks, how do you decide which one to join? This is how I was looking at when I was also designing my methodology of how to ensure that it had integrity. People choose social networking sites according to their internet self-efficacy, the need for cognition, the need to belong, and a collective self-esteem. And I just found this amusing. Experts believe social media forums to be potentially prolific in terms of global social laboratories that will undoubtedly continue to generate tremendous research interest. Within the field of public health, much attention has been devoted to the potential use of mass media. So we're using mass media to try to change or modify attitudes and shape behavior. One of the things that those of us in the field also have noticed and we talk about is that we can tell from people's social media posts, let's just say their level of sobriety, based on the time they post and what they post. And we keep track of that certainly with our clients and those people that have reached out. This is the difference between mass media channels and interpersonal channels, and we'll be talking about that when you see the results of my study, which I'm getting to, I promise. Studies have shown, this is important, that problem drinkers who do not use available forms of treatment will engage. So people, it's been shown, who will not go to traditional treatment, who will not go to AA meetings, will engage with a website. How easy it is to find? I put in some keywords. I looked at these: addiction, alcoholism, alcohol, drug treatment. I looked at all of these. That's how many possibilities there are. That's how many results I found that people can look. And a lot of these are for different things, sales, but a lot of these are treatment or treatment opportunities or websites. So that's pretty good. 83.5 million possibilities. Cooley, who was a sociologist in 1902, said that the self is a social product which is shaped from an individual's interpersonal interactions. What he basically said in his mirror effect is that my self-worth and what I feel about myself is reflected back from you, and that's how I determine it. What I see coming back at me is going to be how I feel about myself, rather than feeling just about myself internally and just deciding I have the ego strength to do that. A lot of my perception of myself is going to be influenced by the exterior. Social scientists are deciding someone who's presenting themselves online becomes disembodied and anonymous. How do you conceive yourself when others also are disembodied and potential anonymous. So if you're dealing with computer-mediated communication and you're not face-to-face, does that change the relationship? Does that change the way you react and respond? And then this is the online inhibition effect theory. Well, this is important for online sobriety. You don't know me, you can't see me, you can hang up or discharge yourself from the conversation, see you later. These are all things that have to do with theory, and of course I had to include the theory because we are media psychologists and interested in the psychology part. This is the same thing in online disinhibition. It means that I'm more likely probably to say things when I'm cloaked behind mediated communication than I might say to your face. So there's a freedom in that. There's also a liability with that. The disinhibition of it means that I might be more comfortable expressing myself. And certainly when you're talking about addiction and people are shameful or have embarrassment tethered to it, then it might be easier for me to disclose something online. But then there's the option of being duplicitous. When I'm online, I can be anybody I want. I'm the architect, the curator of my own online presence. When I'm face-to-face with someone, we're the subjects of a conversation. When I go online, suddenly I am the object of something that I've created and the object of an engagement with someone else who's also an object that they've created. So there can be some dishonesty, which becomes important in terms of getting sober. And it's all about impression management. You want to decide how are you going to manage how you appear to others. There's FOMO and JOMO. So when we're online, some people have a fear of missing out. Some people have a joy of missing out. And that has to do also with the difference between face-to-face and online relationships. The top concerns of online sober support engagement is the confidentiality protection. You could be duplicitous or present in an authentic online presence. It encourages isolation, which for someone who struggles with alcohol or drugs, that's usually something that's a primary problem to begin with. They're very isolated, so this just encourages that you can just sit at your computer. And there are some that believe that online relationships results in more weak than stronger relational ties. CMC allows for less structured commitment. If I have to go to a face-to-face meeting, I have to get up, I have to get dressed, I have to drive there, show up, and be there with other people. If I just decide to go online, I can come and go as I please, really with no cause or causality of it. So why would you do online sobriety support? Well, because the internet is a safer place. You can talk about yourself and things that you might not want to talk about. It's always available. People who are compromised feel like they might be discriminated against because they're talking about things that are private. You can connect with other people. So say that I live in a small town and I really don't feel comfortable with those people. I can connect to AA meetings all over. So I can find like-minded people who are interested in the same kind of things I am. And it can help with people who are shameful, who really are isolated geographically, legitimately, or have other issues. Why wouldn't you do it? Well, because it's easier to be disingenuous. Suiting up and showing up, meaning getting it together, getting dressed and driving to a meeting shows part of a commitment to your sobriety, which people in the field believe is important. One of the things about sobriety is that it's all about the fellowshipping, meaning alcoholics banding with one another, talking, going to coffee, whatever they do, creating those new bonds and relationships. And if you're online, you really don't have that ability. Isolation is the nemesis of sobriety. There's also can be a vulnerability. There's people out there who could maybe take advantage of this through different kinds of cyberbullying, catfishing, all kinds of things. So what do people really think? Well, the first hypothesis was that participants who have engaged in both sobriety support, face-to-face and online, will show a preference. So the hypothesis was that people would show a preference for face-to-face. Then we had some questions. Will the participants who have engaged in both face-to-face and online sobriety support find it easier to be honest? Where is it easier to be honest, in face-to-face or online? We also wanted to know, because this is a question, will participants who have engaged in face-to-face and online be likely to be drunk or high? Some people question that if you're online, you could be drunk or you could be high while you're participating online, which you'd probably be less likely to do if you were face-to-face out of shame or embarrassment or just pride. So we also wanted to know if there was a migration. Did people who were attending both, were they starting to migrate more toward online and decrease their attendance at face-to-face? And then, of course, we wanted to know, is there a difference in efficacy of success between the two? So the participants, I needed to have them have a command of comfort with social media platform engagement because I need to know that they've been online. I need to make sure that it's as pure as possible, so I need to ensure that the people who are participating are comfortable with navigating and negotiating social media. They needed to represent meetings that are ostensibly anonymous. I needed people who were 18 or older because I didn't want to have to deal with IRB on dealing with minors. And I wanted people who were currently in had a history of participation in recovery. I invited them to participate in the study via social networking private messages. Respondents were multicultural, demographically dispersed. I got a pretty good sample globally globally, which was really cool. When I cleaned the data, my N ended up being 196, which was broke down by gender like that. I got a lot more responses, but my methodologist and I cleaned the data to make sure that everything was as pure as possible again. We had to create something called the Sobriety Support Preference Scale. We got that approved as well. Design was quasi-experimental. Again, participants were invited through private messaging and open posts on sobriety support-oriented Facebook pages. I did my survey through SurveyMonkey to make sure that that was clean, and we analyzed the results through SPSS 22. Okay, so here was just a copy. I sent this to people. This was the message that they got in their private box, and it explained what I was doing and how to access it. To determine if there was a significant difference in preference, this is the methodology that we used and how we analyzed. Two composite variables of items were created. We had to reverse key scores for survey questions just to make sure that everything had integrity. The results, just if you look through those numbers, indicated that participants significantly prefer face-to-face. All of my results, thank goodness, came back extremely significant, and we ran them and checked them several times. The participants said, these are people who do both, that they like face-to-face better. Honesty. This is a little tricky because what it said is respondents find being honest in their face-to-face sobriety board engagement easier to do. And this is something that I'm going to hopefully not confuse you with the next part. So they're saying it's honest, it's easier. When I'm looking you in the face, when I'm staring at you, when you're looking at me, when I've created those face-to-face relationships, it's easier to be honest at a face-to-face AA meeting. Lying. Now, this seems like it's incongruous and actually polarized in terms of the results. When I say the participants lie more about their actual sobriety time, what it means is, yes, they're able to be more honest face-to-face about lots of things, except the piece about their sobriety, meaning that if someone has relapsed, they're not necessarily as comfortable telling it face-to-face. They will tell it online. So they might say in a face-to-face AA meeting, yes, I'm still sober. Yes, I've been sober for X amount of time. But online, they will be more open about if they have a problem or if they relapse. We found that participants were significantly more likely to be drunk or high at a face-to-face meeting, which was not what I expected to happen. But I'll talk about that in the discussion of why that result came out that way. Is there a migration? This is what everyone in face-to-face AA is talking about. Is it all going to be face-to-face AA going to die? People said they have not just decreased their face-to-face sobriety support attendance. They are buttressing their face-to-face with online, and they're using online support during off hours, but they did not report significantly that they are deciding to migrate away from face-to-face. Success. This is the important one, and in terms of a lot of controversy that goes on about people having a problem with AA, greater participation in face-to-face significantly supported and predicted better sobriety success. Greater participation in online sobriety support predicts less. Part two of this is participation in face-to-face predicts a longer period of time sober also. So the longer participation in face-to-face is going to predict that you're going to stay sober longer. If you only participate or mostly participate in online, it's going to predict a less time sober. So there was also a significant positive correlation between age and sobriety time. We just did this, but it obviously makes sense. The older you are, the more time you have to get and stay sober. So when considering the older a person is, the longer time they've had possible to secure, this result was not surprising. The modality preference. Online sobriety support is still relatively new, so that there was a preference for face-to-face. Face-to-face has the edge. It's been around for 80 years. People are resistant to change. People who are traditional face-to-face users are still weighing and measuring the value of online. There may be people out there who still have a problem negotiating online, don't feel as comfortable with it. There may be personal reasons. I've got good friends and I've made really good relationships in face-to-face, and I'm not willing to give those up. This is the big one right here, and this is why I keep suggesting that this study be followed up. I didn't have anyone under the age of 18, so I had not really a lot of digital natives. As they assume the majority of the population, this result online could dramatically shift, and it probably will because they're very comfortable with online forums and platforms and online. So that's the part that we'll look at in the future. But right now, this is what it looks like. Honesty. Established research suggests a vulnerability for online dishonesty. The other thing is honesty is a primary principle in Alcoholics Anonymous. If you can't get honest, you're probably going to struggle with trying to maintain your abstinence and sobriety. And it's more difficult to be dishonest face-to-face. You're looking me in the eye, and you might have a harder time being duplicitous. Being rigorously honest is one of the principles that's encouraged in face-to-face. So a lot of people come in, trying to get sober, and they've been really duplicitous. They've not been completely honest. So we want to try to move the needle on that. So being rigorously honest is something that we promote. The temptation to self-present disingenuously online. So I want to really control or manipulate my online presence because I can't. I can't really do that as clearly or as easily in face-to-face. This is the thing where I talked about there might be a little bit of an issue between honesty and lying. So honesty in terms of AA is self-disclosure and behavior. And what my results showed is that people do that easier in face-to-face. Lying is equated with fallacious claims of sobriety time. That was the difference of why you wonder, oh, they're more honest, but they're lying. That's why. And we specifically had different survey questions that were clearly indicating so we could get these results. So they're drunk or they're high. Why would they be more drunk or high during face-to-face? Well, the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. So you can come. And you should probably come if you have a problem drinking. Come to an AA meeting and try to get some help rather than continuing the same pattern. So you're welcome, and there's plenty of people who come to these meetings drunk or high. So we think that's why that came back that way. And it's also not uncommon for newcomers, meaning people who are new to the program, or people who have relapsed to attend face-to-face meetings while under the influence. So it's a surprising result, especially considering the concern of no sober accountability while engaging in online. Well, this is an argument for it. It's saying no, people are saying that they are sober or more sober online when engaging than they are face-to-face. So that's going to be something that's important. Okay, is there migration? So this is at the root of most discussions. This is the fear that everything's going to go online, and AA face-to-face is going to, hear a death knell. Importance of suiting up and showing up. The three legacies of I'm not going to go into that right now. Fellowshipping, understanding that some individuals truly can't or won't attend face-to-face, and there's a lack of digital natives that could confound the result. Sobriety success. We had open-ended responses, and besides what they could do on the Likert scale that we had, it was the open-ended responses that really showed us that people believe stronger affinity for face-to-face. That was really interesting, and we looked through that and did some content analysis on that. So that was really where we saw how people felt. There are people who really like blending it. The lesser of the N of the younger participants, the higher N of those with traditionally established sobriety. So again, the older you are, the longer time you have to have sobriety. So that's going to explain, again, that result. And people who relapse probably did not respond to the survey invitation. These are limitations. It's the authenticity of data, the nascence of online recovery resources, the actual skill of participant to negotiate technology, and the lack of participants under 18 were some limitations of this study. Recommendations. It would be great if people would replicate it to see, as the digital natives assume greater majority. Is the migration stronger? Does anything change? Investigation of online relationships. Study comparisons of other face-to-face. We did some with people who have eating disorders and people with weight programs and exercise programs, but there weren't a lot. It was pretty anemic in terms of face-to-face versus online relationship studies that I could find in the literature. Hopefully there will be more. And other support groups besides Sobriety Base. That's my bibliography, and I want to thank you all.
Thank you, Don. That was great. I'm sure we have a lot of questions. I want to open it up to folks to go ahead and ask questions if you have them.
Yeah, this is Tanisha. I'll just jump in there. Thank you for the awesome presentation. This was amazing information. The beginning slides you had are really, really important, particularly the ones where you're saying that what addicts look like, because there isn't a particular face. There's suits, they're young, they're old, they're middle-aged, they're of all different shapes, sizes, and colors. I think that's probably one of the benefits of face-to-face is that that's where you really get to see all of the different creeds that show the human nature in addiction. And you and I are in Los Angeles, and so much of addiction out here, it's rampant, expected, and overlooked because of the industry that pretty much funnels Hollywood, Los Angeles in particular. And going into face-to-face, you see a lot of, it's like you said, that social facilitation or something about intergroup relations where you have each other's support, that's triplets theory, I think. Instead of looking at new media as a substitute for face-to-face, do you see the progression of it being more of a digital extension of face-to-face? I've been to a lot of meetings with friends as for support and things like that, high profile and low profile. And half the time we have to find a meeting on an app. We have to download it. But do you see any sort of integration where in face-to-face settings, maybe they're integrating new technologies to kind of extend that?
Yeah, thank you for everything you said. And absolutely, in fact, I'm working right now with a couple of different people because there's an app for that. There's an app for an app. And one of the things that people are very interested in is the blend. So I'm working with some people right now on a couple of different people on applications for meetings. There's a lot out now, but in terms of the blend, and there's an interesting phenomenon that's happening right now, which those of us who are watching this are watching it closely, and you may have seen some of this on the news. There is an incredible pandemic of heroin use in this country right now being fueled by housewives and socialite and men and people you would never expect to have an addiction. And the way that it was generated was that doctors were overly and generously prescribing painkillers, opiates. And so someone who would never have had a problem suddenly gets hooked on opiates. And I don't know if you've seen anything in the media about this, but there's an entire population that you would never expect. I'm talking PTA moms who are suddenly, as their problem becomes more progressive and the pills are harder to get, they're turning to heroin, which is unbelievable, but they are. So there's a shift right now that's happening that people who are in the field and are professionals know about, that are watching this, and we're trying to see how is this going to work, because a lot of these people have incredible reticence to engaging in a sobriety-based face-to-face program. First of all, they don't think they have a problem. They never really had a problem. It's just this one thing because of a pain issue that was legitimate. This is where we're looking at, especially with wearables, as these become more on the forefront, of incorporating how to design apps and design technology and new media without giving up the face-to-face. And there's some ways to do that, and there are some avenues that we're trying to look at. There's one that's in beta testing right now. It's still not going to replace, like you said, walking in a room, seeing the people, drinking some bad coffee, and really having to be culpable, because the culpability part of it is, I think, the most important part of a face-to-face meeting. And I don't mean culpability in a negative sense. I mean in a sense that's important and that is positive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of room to merge the two.
And that's why I did this study, because I'm a pragmatic thinker and I try to be longitudinal. It's going to happen. What I need to do is, as someone of the old guard, I really just want to ensure there is some documentation, there is some evidence, because this is the first study that was ever done between online and face-to-face AA. And that's why I did it, because I need something to be built upon in case it goes the other way, that somewhere someone can go back and there's a digital argument, which is ironic, somewhere in an archive, that AA face-to-face did have value, because I'm afraid, the last 2.5 generations that were digital immigrants are now walking this planet. Once we are gone, we have abdicated fully to the digital native, and everyone who works with them, and I do, knows that the millennial is a very different kind of system, let's just say. I wanted to do this study because I at least wanted to make a stand and put a flag in the ground that, yes, face-to-face AA does have value and efficacy. So in case it all goes the other way, which you probably will, the scale goes the other way in balance, maybe someone can look it up and say, wait a second, they used to have this thing called face-to-face AA meetings. Anyone want to put one of those together?
Well done.
That's too funny, because that's exactly
I have a
what it'll
question.
probably end up being. Do we have some other questions?
Hi, this is Mary, and I have a question for you.
Sure.
Where do you expect to go in the future with this research?
This research was something that I wanted to do because I wanted to make a stand. And like I said in the earlier response, Bill, do something. Unfortunately, I don't see the needle moving significantly on my results, because my methodologist was tops. We were so clean on everything. So I'm pretty confident. And I'm presenting this data at APA in Toronto. But I really don't expect this or move further with this, because we were very comprehensive in our instrument, that I'm going to see any different results in the immediate future. So what I've done, actually, I've moved in and I'm working on something else, which is technology addiction. So my research now is on the addiction to technology and how technology is navigated and what kind of influence it has on us. But for this study, I just hope somewhere down the road, maybe someone can do it more comprehensively than me, maybe with a different population.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that you are getting into internet addiction. I think that's, especially in the Orient, that is so incredibly much a problem. But I want to direct your attention to some work done by Zachary Rosenthal, who's at Duke University. The research that he did was on addictions and using new technologies, and they use specifically cell phones and call-ins and stuff like that to manage treatment protocols, so that when they put addicts back, recovered addicts back into their environment, they had kind of a safe haven where they could call. And the unexpected finding that he had was that the addicts reported that just hearing the recorded voice on the answering service would help them diminish their desire to take the drug. So I think there are some real important implications that we might have for using it as counters, if you want to say. Use the same
Indeed.
kind of, I don't want to call it addictive, but this kind of very strong associational base that these people tend to have, but use it in a positive way and make the connections a positive one.
Indeed, and I very much appreciate that. And when I said earlier I'm working with two different people on that, that's exactly what I'm doing. It's also about referencing what you said, this sense of community that I talked about. That's why I included all of those slides within this presentation and as part of my research, because it talks about the strength of a community can have. The applications and the aftercare and the outreach, there's a lot of studies that have been done on fitness and weight issues and those kind of things. We have a colleague who went to our university who did her dissertation on those kind of affirmations, and you're right, of course. And I'm working right now with a treatment center and with an individual who designs these to do exactly what you're talking about. It's starting to become very popular, and I agree with you. It's very strong.
That was not a major part of his finding. That's just something he kind of tossed off in talking about the protocol. And they were using virtual reality, which was very fascinating.
Jerry Lynn.
Exactly, my field.
That's Jerry Lynn's wheelhouse.
Yeah, well, but
there's actually what I found interesting, and this is just an outlier. They're in Second Life, if anyone is familiar with it, they actually have a rehab. So you can, ostensibly relapse in real life and send your avatar to rehab in Second Life. I found that just fascinating. There's a rehab in Second Life. No, I'm not going to treatment, but don't worry, my avatar's in rehab right now in Second Life, so we'll be fine.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that I wanted to direct your attention to, in addition to the idea of opening your mind for the serendipitous kind of connections that might happen in doing, because you evidently have really strong research protocols, which means that
I was taught well. I don't have them. They were banged into my head by my mentors, including one of whom is directing this call. She's the one facilitating. So I have people that I was fortunate, or depending on how you look at it, unfortunate enough, that aligned with me and took pity on me and taught me their protocol. So I was in good company. I give them the credit.
So give credit where credit is due. But nevertheless, that means that you then have this kind of crystal clear science method, which will allow valuable things to come that you can then pioneer that nobody has thought of before because they have been so busily looking at all the minutiae of the scientific method. But once you finish doing that, then you're able to discover things, and you can really come up with some very, very important things. Now,
I love that. Isn't that how gravity was in, that's Newton. I love those things when you suddenly don't expect to find something and you do. So I'm all on board with what you're saying. I'm in.
Yeah, I was looking at the Leaning Tower of Pisa just recently. That's, how Newton discovered gravity, was dropping stuff off of that. And I was thinking, oh, my God, it's really going to fall one of these days.
Yeah, one of these days. But and I agree with you. And I think in just the studies that I've done, I'm very interested when you're looking for something and something either happens through grounded theory and you didn't expect it, or you find something you never expected. I was part of a research team a few years ago at Fielding, and we were looking at different ways that people were looking, where people were finding their therapeutic solutions. And this is, I think, what was the germination of me doing this study a long time ago. So we're looking now that a lot of people didn't have health insurance and were struggling with Obamacare at the time wasn't a thing, where people were going who had lost their jobs during the recession. And we were looking at all kinds of different therapies. We were looking at every kind of alternative and the traditional ones. And this weird outlier kept popping up that shocked and surprised and fascinated us all, because people were in this state of anxiety all over the country based on the fact that Oprah at the time had announced that she was ending her show. Now, we all know she went on her own network, and people were saying they were panicking because they had been relying on Oprah as their therapist, and everything she said they did, and they followed the Oprah life. And it was so weird. We just kept coming out from all over the place and across demographics, geographically, that people were panicking. about they were going to lose their therapist called Oprah, and that's who they'd use. So I love when stuff like that happens, and you go, wow, really?
Well, that is a very interesting thing. It's on the Oprah thing. I personally, I didn't know about this research finding, but I know that in my personal life, I would just be totally astounded by the intelligentsia that was attached to her as the common person. You know, and there was something about her that she seemed to rope everybody in. But nevertheless, I think that what I like, one of the other things I like most about your presentation is that through your managing to escape the rigors of graduate training, you have still maintained a great joie de vivre about the whole process. And that's what will
to the bane of probably some of my professors' existence.
That's right. And that
I don't quite think they knew what to do with that.